Ohio State, man. How we doing? Yeah, good morning there. It's Uncle Lou here. Yeah, that's right. It's me, Uncle Lou, live on LouTube for you. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it also. And too, hey, make sure you subscribe to the channel if you're not already. I post college football videos almost every single day of the year, live shows multiple times a week, and we do it year-round. There is no off-season here. It's time for another 2023 college football preview and prediction video. Up today, the Ohio State Buckeyes. All right, we're going to follow the same format as we've done with the rest of the prediction videos. I'll put a list up right now of the ones I've done so far. Make sure you click back and check those out. There's a playlist. Just click the playlist and the entire list of teams that I've done so far will come up. I'm going to knock out as many as I can over the next couple of weeks before the start of the season. But Ohio State is up today, so same format. Let's recap last year. Let's take a look at their roster and their recruiting, who'd they lose, who's coming in, any coaching changes, and then we'll put next year's schedule up on the screen. We'll go through it game by game, and I'll give you a winner and a loser for every single week. Head coach Ryan Day entering his 5th year as full-time head coach at Ohio State. Of course, there was the year prior to where he took over full-time where he coached, I believe, 3 games while Urban Meyer was suspended. So Ryan Day's record in his time at Ohio State, 3-0 in that year where he coached 3 games while Meyer was suspended. 13-1 in his first year, then 7-1 in the COVID year, 2020, 11-2 in 2021, and 11-2 in 2022. Lost to Michigan the last couple of years, which always leaves a bad taste in the mouth of the Ohio State fans. You know, it's the whole, if you're going to go 1-11 thing, let the one win be against that team. That's sort of the Ohio State-Michigan deal there. So obviously disappointing to lose that game, but overall, like most years, Ohio State had a pretty good year. They're loaded with talent. They have pretty good coaching. And they pretty much win 10 or 11 games a year in their sleep. We just went through it, but 13-1, 7-1, that was the COVID year, 11-2, 11-2. Didn't win the Big Ten each of the last 2 years, of course, losing to Michigan at the end of the year. Michigan goes on to win the East and the Big Ten both those years. Michigan made the playoffs in both those years. Ohio State, of course, though, did make the playoffs last year, getting into the 4 spot when a couple of teams lost late in the season and on conference championship Saturday, most notably, of course, Southern Cal losing to Utah, really what opened the door for Ohio State to get in. Great game in the Peach Bowl against Georgia, came down to the end. Either team, honestly, could have won that game. I've had a lot of fun over the last 7 or 8 months, kind of going back and forth with Ohio State fans, kind of the couple of weeks leading up to that game, and then the several months after that going back. But that was just one of the best college football playoff games we've ever seen, no question about it. Ohio State misses a kick at the end, and Georgia goes on, of course, to beat TCU in the national championship game. Ohio State recruiting, I mean, hard to get much better. They're top 5 almost every single year in recruiting. I went back and looked over the last 3 or 4 years, but so 4th nationally, 4th nationally, 2nd nationally, 5th nationally. So top 5 every single year in the last 4 years. According to 24/7 Sports, who does a talent index, sort of ranking each team's roster in terms of total talent. The 2023 numbers are not out yet, but you have a pretty good idea where they'll be based on these last 4 recruiting classes. Last year, they were the 3rd most talented team in the country, and when you go back and look at Ohio State's record, it reflects that. Like I mentioned, not losing more than 2 games in a year since really anybody can remember, right? They did lose at home to Oregon a couple of years ago. They've lost to Michigan each of the last 2 years in the regular season. A few years before that, if I remember right, they lost sort of a weird game to Purdue. Maybe the year before that, I think maybe Iowa, but no more than 1 or 2 losses a year for Ohio State, really in the playoff era. Urban Meyer, of course, won the national title in, I believe it was 2015, right? Ryan Day played for a national title in the COVID year, losing to Alabama. Is that how that went down? Beat Clemson in the first round, lost to Alabama, or was it LSU in 2019? Anyway, Ryan Day's played for 1 national title. And lost it. So made the playoffs a couple of times. Fans a little bit antsy about losing to Michigan. I don't really understand the fire Ryan Day stuff. And look, I've had some fun at Ryan Day's expense. I think some of the interviews he gives and kind of sometimes the way he comes across does sound like complaining and whining. But there's really no arguing with his results on the field. I mean, I know you don't want to lose to Michigan, but when you're as good as Ohio State is, the goal of any given season shouldn't really be to beat Michigan. I understand it's a huge rivalry. It might be the biggest rivalry in college football. It's either that or the Iron Bowl, in my opinion. So I understand like the want to beat Michigan every single year. But if I were to tell Ohio State that over the next 5 years they're going to lose an average of 1 game a year, and it's to Michigan, but they make the playoffs all 5 of those years, you'd probably take that. At least I would expect you to. The goal for someone as good as Ohio State should be to get into the playoffs, which, of course, then gives you a chance to win a national title. Again, I completely understand the want to beat Michigan, but some of the talk I hear about firing Ryan Day if he loses to Michigan for a 3rd year in a row, I think is just completely ridiculous. And again, this is coming from somebody who has criticized Ryan Day when I thought he deserved it. But you're talking about a coach here who is averaging 1.5 losses a year. And the idea that you might fire him, to me, just doesn't make any sense at all. We're fixing to expand to a 12-team playoff. There is no year in the foreseeable future that Ohio State will not be in that 12-team playoff, whether they beat Michigan or not. If I had to bet money right now, will Ohio State make the playoffs the first 4 years of a 12-team playoff? I would bet yes. So I don't really understand the talk around firing Ryan Day. I know it's not very many Ohio State fans, and then sort of all the Ohio State fans get lumped in together. That's kind of a product of the internet. Everyone does it. I do it. You know, I hear a fan of a certain team say something dumb, and then, you know, I'll make a video saying these blah, blah, blah fans are ridiculous. And it's really only a few of them. The problem is the most ridiculous takes are the ones that tend to get magnified on the internet and social media and shared around. So it seems like there's a lot of Ohio State fans running around that want Ryan Day fired or would support firing Ryan Day if he lost to Michigan again. I doubt that's a majority of the fan base, though. He's been a pretty good coach. All right, let's take a look at some numbers for Ohio State. I've done this for every single team we've covered, so we're going to keep it going here. Where do I have Ohio State ranked? It may not matter to you, but I put out a ranking. I do 3 off-season rankings. I do one after signing day in February, one after all the spring games wrap up in April, and I do a 3rd and final preseason poll around the beginning of August, which I actually just put out a couple of days ago. I've got Ohio State at 5th in my ranking. The coaches poll, which came out also a day or two ago, has Ohio State at 4th. I've seen Ohio State as high as 2 in some rankings. I've seen them as low as 6 in some rankings. I think they deserve to be in the top 5, 100% for sure. I'm not going to argue with anybody who thinks they should be ranked 2, 3, or 4. I've got them at 5. I don't think anybody's crazy to have them at 3 or 4. I do think that Georgia and Michigan should be 1 and 2 in everyone's ranking, just based on what they've done over each of the last 2 years and what both of those teams have coming back in 2023. But Ohio State anywhere in like the 3 to 5 range, I think is fair. 6, I think, is a little bit on the outside. I think it should be a little higher than that, but I have seen them 6 in some rankings. Again, I have them 5th. The coaches poll has them 4th. I don't have a problem with either of those spots for Ohio State. What's the expected win total for Ohio State in 2023? The Vegas odds. This is a betting number, right? It's 10.5. I know you can't win 10.5 games. Again, this is a betting number, so people who like to bet on college football, they will bet over or under a team's expected win total. So in the case of Ohio State with 10.5, if you think they're going to win 11 or more games, and this is a regular season bet only, so we're talking about 12 games here, the over-under 10.5 expected win total. If you think they're going to win more than that, you bet the over. So if you think they're going 11-1 or 12-0, you bet over 10.5. If you think they're going worse than that, like 10-2, 9-3, then you would bet the under. So this just gives you a pretty good idea of what the betting public feels about a certain team, because this number 10.5 moves up and down based on which direction people are betting their money, right? So 10.5, the expected win total for Ohio State in 2023, which makes sense really because they lose, either 1 or 2 regular season games a year over most years. What about Heisman Trophy odds? C.J. Stroud, of course, gone off to the NFL. We'll talk more about that when we look at the offense here in a second. But with him gone off to the NFL, that opens up the door for the next in what has been a remarkable run, really, of Ohio State quarterbacks. It seems to be a plug-and-play situation at Ohio State when it comes to the quarterback. Now, a lot of that clearly has to do with the fact that they've got extremely talented quarterbacks. I'm not trying to suggest that they could just put any warm body back there at quarterback and they'd have an amazing year, but Ohio State has had a remarkable run of QBs, going all the way back, really, to the start of Urban Meyer's run at Florida State. It seems like every couple of years they lose a Heisman Trophy caliber or Heisman Trophy level QB, and whichever quarterback it is that they decide to replace him with has similar numbers to that. I expect that to be the case again in 2023 for Ohio State, but they do have two quarterbacks sort of battling for the job, Kyle McCord and Devin Brown. Most people expect Kyle McCord to get the starting nod, myself included, and the Heisman Trophy odds for Ohio State's quarterbacks reflect that. Kyle McCord's odds are at plus 2,500. Devin Brown's odds are at plus 4,000. Neither one of those players, though, has the best odds of any Ohio State player right now to win the Heisman Trophy, and you could probably guess who that is. It's Marvin Harrison. His odds are at plus 2,000. Let me make one other note here about the quarterback thing. Because there are two quarterbacks battling for the starting job at Ohio State, it's hurting both of their odds preseason-wise in terms of winning the national title. Whoever is eventually named the starter, again, I expect it to be Kyle McCord, whoever is eventually named the starter, whether that happens a week or two before week one or we have to wait till week one to just sort of see who takes the field as the starter, that person's odds will drastically increase. They will get a lot better once the betting public is fully confident in who the starter is going to be. But right now, Marvin Harrison at plus 2,000 has the best odds of any Ohio State player to win the Heisman. What about the Big Ten title? Ohio State, of course, has not won the Big Ten title either of the last 2 years, losing to Michigan in the last game of the regular season, sending Michigan to the Big Ten title game instead of Ohio State. Who's the favorite to win it in 2023? Ohio State. And this is a little shocking to me. Not because I think Ohio State can't win the Big Ten. Of course they can. But Michigan and Ohio State, I mean, at best, I think the best case scenario you can make as an Ohio State fan is that you're neck and neck with Michigan. There's no real hard evidence that you're drastically ahead of them, right? So I'm a little surprised Ohio State is the favorite here, but it's only by a little bit. Ohio State has the best odds to win the Big Ten at plus 170. Michigan has the second best odds to win the Big Ten at plus 175. So that's extremely close in terms of betting odds. If you don't bet or don't understand betting odds, what these numbers mean is plus 170 means Ohio State's odds to win the Big Ten are plus 170. What that means is if you bet $100 on Ohio State to win the Big Ten, you will win $170. So you actually win more than you bet. Same thing with Michigan, but it's plus 175. So only a $5 difference on a $100 bet on who wins the Big Ten between Michigan and Ohio State. So really neck and neck there. What about national title odds? Similar story in terms of Ohio State and Michigan anyway. Ohio State has the third best odds to win the national title at plus 650. Michigan has the fourth best odds at plus 800. Georgia and Bama have the first and second best odds respectively. Georgia's the betting favorite right now to win the national title. Bama after that in second. Ohio State third, again at plus 650. $100 bet on Ohio State to win the national title will win you $650 if it actually happens. Michigan fourth place at plus 800. All right, let's take a look at Ohio State's offense. Not a lot of problems offensively for Ohio State. Like I mentioned, really going back to the Urban Meyer days. It's been a plug-and-play situation at quarterback. They score a lot of points. They put up a lot of yards. They spread you out. They've got NFL wide receivers all over the field every single year and a draftable NFL quarterback almost every single year as well. But C.J. Stroud is gone, and no matter which quarterback takes over for him, I do not think they're going to be as good as C.J. Stroud in year one that they're a starter. C.J. Stroud was a really, really good quarterback, drafted very high in the NFL draft this past April, I guess the draft was. And while I have full faith and trust in Ohio State's ability to replace quarterbacks, I'm not convinced that they can give Ohio State everything that C.J. Stroud gave them last season. That doesn't mean I think the quarterback is going to be bad. I think quarterbacks are going to be really, really good. Whoever the quarterback is, I think will be in the Heisman conversation by the halfway point of the season. It's just if you're putting C.J. Stroud way up here in the stratosphere of Ohio State QBs, a first-year starter I think is going to be at least a little bit below that in year one. We'll see. Again, I don't expect that to mean that Ohio State's offense is going to fall off some sort of a cliff or they won't be able to complete passes or sustain drives or anything like that. I think they'll be fine at the quarterback position. I mean, you're going from like a 10 out of 10 on the quarterback scale to what, maybe an 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10, depending on how well either of these two quarterbacks performs in their first year as the starter. So again, not a knock on Ohio State. It's just the reality of the situation. The same thing is true with Bama. They lose Bryce Young. Whoever Bama puts in there at quarterback in year one's not going to give them what Bryce Young did, right? It's just, I mean, we just kind of understand that as college football fans. That's what I mean about the Ohio State quarterback situation. Again, I expect it to be Kyle McCord. I don't know that for certain. I'm not sure how the Ohio State fans feel or which way they're leaning. You can let me know in the comments down below if you are an Ohio State fan, who you think is going to take that first snap for Ohio State in week one. I think it's going to be Kyle McCord. Wide receivers, it's almost not even worth talking about Ohio State wide receivers anymore. Every single year, they're going to have probably 4 NFL wide receivers on their roster and 1 or 2 first-round talent wide receivers on their roster, and that's definitely the case again in 2023. You start with Marvin Harrison. Marvin Harrison might have been the best player in college football last year. A definite argument and case can be made that he could be the best college football player in college this year. I think him and Brock Bowers are probably the two best offensive players in all of college football. Brock Bowers, a tight end for Georgia. It's hard for a non-quarterback to win the Heisman. We've seen that over the last 50 years of Heisman Trophy ceremonies. But if there's a player in this country that is not a quarterback that could win the Heisman Trophy this year, my money would be on Marvin Harrison. The guy's absolutely unreal. There's just no denying his talent. And it doesn't stop there. Abuka is back. Julian Fleming is back. Their tight end, Stover, is back. They're just absolutely loaded. And those are just the starters. Again, Ohio State's wide receiver twos are better than 95% of teams' wide receiver one group. They're just absolutely loaded. Brian Hartline, one of, if not the best offensive recruiters in the country, particularly at the wide receiver position. They just go out and get whichever one or two wide receivers they want every single year, it seems like, when it comes to recruiting, and no signs of that slowing down either. Speaking of Brian Hartline, though, is he calling plays this year? That's been a question this offseason that Ohio State fans have debated. Ryan Day's been asked about it multiple times. Brian Hartline has been asked about it multiple times. Ryan Day is one of these head coaches that likes to call his own plays. He's an offensive guy, came up under Urban Meyer at Ohio State and some other places, but he's an offensive guy. He likes to call his own plays. You know, Jimbo Fisher is this way. There are several. Dan Mullen is this. There are several offensive head coaches who prefer to be their own offensive coordinator and call their own plays. There's been some pushback over the last couple of years that maybe it's time for Ryan Day to start to delegate some of that play calling responsibility, some of those duties to someone else, whether that's a true offensive coordinator or, in the case of Ohio State, in the chatter this offseason, Brian Hartline. I do expect Brian Hartline to call some plays. How's that going to work? I'm not real sure. I mentioned Jimbo Fisher, so let me say something real quick here. This is not an apples-to-apples comparison with what's going on at Texas A&M. Jimbo Fisher's offense has been terrible over the last few years. It's outdated. They have a hard time getting first downs, never mind scoring points. The criticism that I've heard, and this has been from Ohio State fans, so this isn't, Uncle Lou talking trash again. This is what I have heard from honest Ohio State fans critiquing their own team or their own head coach. They feel like at certain points in games, when games are close, or in big games or late in games, that the pressure is getting to Ryan Day in terms of calling plays, and that he's made some boneheaded play calling decisions late in some big critical games. Just as an example, going back to the Peach Bowl from this last year, Ohio State made some questionable play calls on what wound up being their next to last possession of the game, or was it the last possession of the game? Basically, they threw their way down the field to about the 30 or 40 yard line. C.J. Stroud ran a couple of times, but there were 3 or 4 pass plays called in a row that got Ohio State all the way down to about the 20 or 25 yard line. And then like 3 running plays in a row where they lost 7 or 8 yards or something it was. And then I guess they went on to miss the field goal, if I remember. Anyway, it's things like that have happened, I guess, multiple times. At least, again, this is in the eyes of the this is what I hear from Ohio State fans. So they're looking for Ryan Day to maybe delegate some of these play calling duties off to Brian Hartline. We'll see how that sort of works itself out over the course of the season. But back to the wide receivers, best wide receiver group in the country. There are some other teams that have great wide receiver rooms. Texas comes to mind. Southern Cal comes to mind. Tennessee comes to mind. I even like Georgia's wide receiver room. They don't have a true elite, like wide receiver one level, 6'3" type dominating wide receiver that the other teams have, but Georgia's got probably, Georgia's got probably the best group of wide receiver twos in the country. That's probably what I have. But anyway, Ohio State's got the best wide receivers. No one even debates that. Stover at tight end, not a Brock Bowers, but nobody is a Brock Bowers. But Stover's one of the best 10 tight ends in the country, I think. He obviously benefits from the offense that they run and all the attention that the wide receivers get, but he's really, really good. Running back, one of the best 1-2 combinations in the Big Ten, if not the country. Now, unfortunately for Ohio State, they're in the same conference as Michigan, who has Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards. I think that's probably the best running back duo in the Big Ten. It's not a slight on Travion Henderson or Mayan Williams, 2 really good running backs at Ohio State. Penn State's got a really good 1-2 combination, too, at the running back position. But Ohio State is right up there. With them, with Henderson and Williams. Last year, they combined for almost 1,400 yards between the two of them and 21 touchdowns. And that was with some injury concerns with Travion Henderson. A healthy Travion Henderson and a healthy Mayan Williams over the course of an entire season could easily eclipse the 2,000-yard mark, especially with a first-year starter at quarterback. Maybe they'll take some of the pressure off of him, right, and run the ball a little bit more. Again, this sort of gets back to the Ryan Day versus Brian Hartline play calling thing and which direction they decide to go. But two really, really good running backs. If there's a concern for Ohio State, and again, we're talking about rich people problems here. When you talk about concerns when it comes to Ohio State's offense, we're splitting hairs. You really got to dig deep to find anything to be concerned about. So I don't expect Ohio State's offensive line to be bad by any stretch of the imagination. But if there's one position group on Ohio State's offense that I think you would have some concern about, maybe it's the offensive line. You lose both your tackles, including Paris Johnson. It's not going to be easy to replace. Now, they recruit well, like we mentioned, and they've got a lot of offensive linemen with playing experience. But they've got to find replacements for both those tackles. We'll see what they do there. Over on the defensive side of the ball, it's not as cut and dry as it is offensively. Most of the criticism leveled towards Ohio State over the last couple of years has been over on the defensive side of the ball. Of course, they changed defensive coordinators after the 2021 season, which, we can joke, we can whatever we want. The reality is that if you go back to that 2021 season where Ohio State lost those two games, Oregon in the beginning of the year, Michigan at the end of the year, they gave up almost 600 yards rushing in those two games. That's where the label of soft really first started to kind of bubble to the surface. And now it's kind of overused to describe just kind of Ohio State's, program in general. But that was sort of the baseline of where that whole their soft thing sort of came to be. So they got rid of that defensive coordinator and they brought in Jim Knowles, right? Was that his name? Yeah, Jim Knowles. Last year, look, there was an obvious improvement in Ohio State's defense from 2021 to 2022. So bringing Jim Knowles in was obviously the right decision. They obviously improved. Now, the defense let them down against Michigan and in the Peach Bowl against Georgia. Not quite as bad as what we saw in 2021, and not even necessarily just the run defense, right? It was sort of late game collapses, second half collapses. The Ohio State-Michigan game was close at halftime. Ohio State was beating Georgia at halftime. They lost both of those games, and it's because of what happened in the second half. The Peach Bowl against Georgia, Ohio State was outscored, I believe, 18-3 in the second half. And as well, look, C.J. Stroud played the game of his life in the Peach Bowl. It's one of the best quarterback performances I have seen in a long, long time. And Georgia's got an NFL defense. What C.J. Stroud did in that Peach Bowl was remarkable. But in the second half of that game, he was the second best quarterback on the field. And that's not because Stetson Bennett is way better than C.J. Stroud. I think we all know C.J. Stroud's a much better quarterback than Stetson Bennett. I don't think anybody would argue otherwise. It's the Ohio State defense let them down in the second half of that game. They just could not stop Georgia. The same thing was true in the previous game at the end of the regular season against Michigan. The game was close at halftime, and in the second half, Ohio State's defense just collapsed and folded in on itself. They gave up multiple explosive plays, big plays, touchdown plays over 50 yards, long runs, receivers were open. The defense just really let them down. Now, I expect Ohio State's defense to take another step forward this year in what will be year 2 under Jim Knowles. And if they want to win a national title, which is clearly the stated goal for Ohio State, that's the area where they have to improve, right? Defensively, particularly in the second half of big games. Yeah, you can nitpick and find areas offensively where maybe they could get a little bit better here and there. There was some criticism of C.J. Stroud last year that maybe he didn't run enough. Now he ran plenty in the Peach Bowl, but prior to that, that was sort of the criticism. But you're looking for needles in the haystack here when you start to criticize Ohio State offensively. Defensively, there is clearly room for Ohio State to grow and get better and move forward defensively. And in year 2 under Jim Knowles, I expect that to happen. What's the defense going to look like in 2023 under Jim Knowles in his second year? Jim Knowles, of course, runs that 4-2-5 defense. In those last 2 games of the year last year, the Michigan in the regular season and then the next Georgia in the Peach Bowl, Ohio State's last 2 games, they gave up an average of 43.5 points. Now you're going to say, well, that's against 2 really good teams. Okay, 9 yards a play, though. 9 yards a play. So that's just sort of the cherry on top of what we were talking about there. Got to get a little bit better on the defensive side of the ball. Again, look, if you're a 3-win team, it's easy to improve and get to 5 or 6 wins, right? When you're winning 10, 11, 12 games a year, and really the only thing you're not winning is a national title, You're talking about incremental changes that need to be made in places in order to get you from 10, 11, 12 wins to 14 or 15 wins in a national title. So I hope this isn't coming off as me bashing. Again, we do a lot of trash talk on this channel, and Georgia did play Ohio State in the Peach Bowl, and I had a lot of fun with the fans in that. Ohio State's defense is not Southern. This isn't a Southern Cal issue. This isn't a Lincoln Riley situation or a Tennessee situation or a North Carolina situation where they've just got no defense at all. Just horrendous defense, just bad philosophy, players out of position, can't tackle. This is not what's going on with Ohio State. It's incremental changes and improvements that need to be made. And again, year 2 under Jim Knowles, I expect to see that. Take a look at the defensive line. I wouldn't describe Ohio State's defensive line as dominant. I think Penn State is maybe a fair comparison. I think Michigan clearly has a better defensive front than Ohio State. But Ohio State's defensive front is good. Maybe not dominant, but good. You have Jack Sawyer on one side and JT Tamamalalayaba, whatever his name is. I don't know. Again, I don't name these players. That's not my job. My job is just to mispronounce their name. But you got them on the outside. They're pretty good, particularly against the pass, combined for 13.5 sacks last year. You got Michael Hall Jr. in the middle. So, again, we're not talking about a position group here, the defensive line or the defensive front of Ohio State, that's terrible. We're talking about a position group that needs to play better against the run and in the second half of big games. That's really what it comes down to for all three levels, but there you go for the defensive line. At linebacker, your two top tacklers, I guess, Eichenberg and Chambers return at linebacker. So some experience, some veterans there. At cornerback, Denzel Burke, I believe is his name. Could be the next in what's becoming a long line of shutdown corners at Ohio State. But he had a good season last year, looking to improve on that this year. And both the safeties return, although I have heard from a lot of Ohio State fans that there's the one safety in particular. Is it Ransom is his name? I may be getting that wrong. They don't ever want to see that guy again, according to what I hear from the Ohio State fans. But both the starting safeties are back from last year. They brought in some defensive backs through the transfer portal as well. So we'll see how they sort of build that back into that secondary heading into 2023. But again, it's not a Southern Cal situation. It's not a horrible defense. This is not a terrible defense. It is a defense that's got to improve and has to play better, particularly in the second halves of big games, if Ohio State wants to win a national title. All right, and if they want to win a national title, they got to win some games. Let's put the schedule up on the screen. We'll go through it game by game, and I'm going to give you a winner and a loser for every single week. Here it is, the Ohio State football schedule for 2023. All right, they actually start out with a road conference game. Not ideal, especially with a new quarterback, but it's Indiana, not just one of the worst teams in the Big Ten last year, but honestly one of the worst Power 5 teams in the entire country. They were Colorado level bad. That's how bad they were. Ohio State should win this game, no problem. If Ohio State wants to, they can play both quarterbacks in this game. They split that up however they decide to do it. And again, I don't know that that's what they'll do. For all I know, they already know who the starting quarterback is going to be. Again, I think it's going to be McCord, but we'll see. If they want to play Devin Brown, there'll be an opportunity in this game for them to play Devin Brown or whoever the backup quarterback ends up being. Should be a fairly easy week 1 win for Ohio State. Same thing for week 2. You host a smaller in-state program, Youngstown State. Let's not forget to make fun of the SEC for scheduling these types of games, though. But congratulations on Youngstown State. And I know the next comment's going to be, yeah, but it's in week 2. Some SEC teams play group of 5 teams in week 11. Well, maybe you should play group of 5 teams in week 11 or week 12 instead of Michigan. Hey, and maybe you're trying to do that since Ryan Day wants the Michigan game moved from the end of the year all the way up into the middle of the year for reasons unknown. Anyway, you should beat Youngstown State, no problem. You're 2-0. Western Kentucky, honestly, Western Kentucky might be the best of these 3 teams that you open up the season with, but I still think you beat them. Sat home. They shouldn't give you any type of an issue. They've had a really good offense a couple of years over the last 4 or 5 years, but again, not on an Ohio State type level. The only thing that would I would worry about at all here would be maybe a slow start here. You have Notre Dame the next week. Maybe you get caught kind of looking forward to that. But even if that happens, I don't expect Ohio State to lose. It could be this could be a thing where no one's watching this game or paying attention to it because it's Western Kentucky, right? So you're sitting home watching whatever other game it is you're watching. And then across the bottom of the screen, scrolls by, something like, Ohio State 17, Western Kentucky 10 midway through the second quarter. And you're like, what? And then you tune back in the fourth quarter and Ohio State is won by 40, something like that. So Ohio State will start out 3-0. And then the first real test of the season on the road at Notre Dame. This was surprisingly a great game last year. I expected Ohio State to blow Notre Dame out last year. I wasn't very high on Notre Dame last year. They had a new coaching staff with Marcus Freeman, a guy never been a head coach before. They had some obvious issues there at quarterback and some other things. And that ended up being a pretty good game. 21-10, I think, was the final score in Columbus in that one. This year, you got to go on the road, play at South Bend, in Notre Dame, night game, 7:30. I've already done a Notre Dame version of this video, so if you've seen my Notre Dame prediction, then you know I do have Ohio State winning this game. This is a dangerous game. No, I think Notre Dame is going to be pretty good this year. I really like Sam Hartman, the quarterback they brought in from Wake Forest. Now, is he C.J. Stroud? Is he Justin Fields? Is he fill-in-the-blank quarterback that Ohio State has had over the last decade? I'm not saying that, but look at the quarterbacks Notre Dame has had. To me, Sam Hartman is an obvious upgrade at the quarterback position for Notre Dame over anything they've had in recent memory. And that's really what has been holding Notre Dame back. They've had good lines of scrimmage, good running backs. It's been sort of the quarterback-wide receiver combination at Ohio State that's been holding them back offensively, at least in my mind. I still have some questions about their wide receiver room. They've got some young talent, but nothing proven. There's not a wide receiver on that team that anyone's aware of right now that scares people. So I do think Ohio State wins this game. I think it could be a close game, but I would not at all be surprised to see Notre Dame pull off the upset here at home. But I've got Ohio State winning their 4-0. Takes you into a kind of an early bye week. You'd like to maybe have this a couple of weeks down the road, maybe between that Purdue and Penn State game, or between Penn State and Wisconsin, maybe even would be ideal. It seems a little early to me for a bye week. Come out of the bye week, you play, again, what I think is a pretty dangerous Maryland team. Last year, when I talked about Maryland, I said the same thing I've really been saying this year. They're not winning the Big Ten East. They're probably not even winning 10 games. But they could beat one of the big three, you know, Ohio State, Michigan, or Penn State. And they almost did it last year. They almost beat Michigan last year. They were beating them at halftime. I think the final score ended up being 28-21 or something like that. They could do something like that again. I don't think it's going to be against Ohio State. You're coming off of a bye week here. Even if for some reason Maryland starts out really hot, you got 2 weeks to prepare for this game. If you've caught any injuries early in the year, you've got an extra week to recover from that here. It's at home. I think you handle Maryland this year and get a win. You're 5-0 now, heading out on the road to play Purdue. Purdue, brand new coaching staff, not very good last year, even though they won the Big Ten West. The Big Ten West was just a complete mess last year. Purdue ended up being like, you know, the pile of poop that stunk the least. So, you know, somebody had to win the Big Ten West. I think heading into the last week or the last 2 weeks of the season, there was like 5 teams that were still alive to win the Big Ten West or whatever. Ended up being Purdue. You do have to play them there, but again, I just don't expect much from Purdue this year. I think you'll go on the road and get a win. You've got 2 extremely difficult games after that, though. If you're looking for any type of a trap game on this schedule, I guess Purdue would be the game you would circle as the quote-unquote trap game. But again, Ohio State's just so talented and Purdue's so bad, new coaching staff. I just don't see a way that they lose that game. You're going to beat Purdue. Now, these next couple of games here, at home against Penn State and on the road at Wisconsin. Let's do Wisconsin first. I've done a Wisconsin version of the video. I do think Wisconsin's going to be one of, if not the most improved teams in college football from last year to this year, at least in terms of overall record. I think Wisconsin probably wins 10 games. I think they probably win the Big Ten West. I think they probably lose in the Big Ten title game no matter who they play. But you got to play them there on the road. If they're hot, if they're sitting on no losses or maybe even 1 loss at this point in the season, and Ohio State's got to go there and play them. Again, this is it looks like an NBC game at 7:30 at night. The jump around, this is going to be a crazy environment. They're excited up there to have Luke Fickell, a brand new head coach. You know, as an Ohio State fan, you know all about Luke Fickell. He was sort of an Ohio State guy for a while. And then at Cincinnati, led him to the playoffs. Now he's at Wisconsin, his first Power 5 opportunity. And Wisconsin's not like some of these other first-year coaching situations like Matt Rule at Nebraska or Dion at Colorado, where you're walking into a room that's just got no talent in it. There is a ton of talent at Wisconsin. Braylon Allen, no one talks about him because he's in the Big Ten West and Wisconsin wasn't very good last year. Everybody talks about the Michigan running backs, Nick Singleton at Penn State, Travion Henderson and Mayan Williams. No one talks about Braylon Allen. Braylon Allen might be the best running back in the Big Ten. I still like Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards, but he's really, really good. every Wisconsin running back every year is really, really good, it seems like. But he's the next in a long line of great Wisconsin running backs. He's going to put up a ton of yards again this year. He's been over 1,000 yards each of his first 2 years. He's going to do it again this year. They're changing up their system offensively, going to more of an air raid style. And I don't think they're just coming out 5 wide and throwing the ball 60 times a game like Mike Leach was doing at Mississippi State, at least not this year. There's too much running back talent. They've got an NFL offensive line, a great running back in Braylon Allen, and they've brought a quarterback in through the transfer portal, Tanner Mordecai, who's had 2 really, really good years. That was at SMU against Group of 5 competition. So an obvious step up in competition here for Tanner Mordecai playing a Big Ten schedule. But the point is he's better than Graham Mertz, I'll tell you that, who they've had the last couple of years. He hit the portal. He's now at Florida. Wisconsin's going to be a good team this year, back more towards the Wisconsin that we've been used to seeing over the last 20 years. A team that can win 10-plus games, a team that can win their division, a team that, if everything goes right, could win the Big Ten every few years. Not this year. I think Ohio State wins on the road at Wisconsin, but a very dangerous game for all the reasons I just talked about, and because it comes right after your biggest home game of the year, Penn State. I think Penn State beats Ohio State this year. I know it hasn't happened since 2016, okay? Michigan hadn't beat you in how long before they beat you in 2021? So this whole, well, they haven't beat us since 2016 thing, if that mattered, you'd have beat Michigan each of the last 2 years, but you didn't. You lost to them. This has got to be the year Penn State gets out of this rut that they're in. Penn State's a really good team. I get kind of tired of hearing people shit on Penn State. Have they been elite? Have they made the playoffs? Have they won a national title? No. In fact, they haven't even won the Big Ten since 2016, last time they beat you. But they've been a good team. I mean, look, if you go 10-2 and your only 2 losses last year were to Ohio State and Michigan, you're a pretty good team. You know, you're a pretty good team, and that's been the case with Penn State under James Franklin. I talked about Nick Singleton. I really like him at the running back position. They've got a really, really good defense. I'm concerned about their defensive line. It really let them down last year. They gave up 300 and something yards rushing to Michigan last year. Their defensive line was on roller skates in that game. It's undersized, which is not good when you're going up against Michigan. But Ohio State's not Michigan. That's a totally different style of football. This could be a very interesting game here. Drew Allar is going to have to play really, really well. And this is a road game for him, a home game for Ohio State. Drew Allar, I think, potentially can give them way more than anything Sean Clifford ever gave. The only thing Sean Clifford ever gave Penn State was wins against teams they were favored to beat. That's it. It seems like Sean Clifford lost every big game he played in. I'm sure if you go back and look over the course of his career, you can find a nice win here and there. But for the most part, Sean Clifford, to me, was a bit of a letdown. Potential, ability, ceiling-wise, Drew Allar has the ability to far surpass anything Sean Clifford ever did. They're going to have to find a playmaker or two at wide receiver. The defense is going to have to hold up against teams like Ohio State, Michigan, some of the upper echelon teams that they play. But if there's been a year since 2016 where Penn State can sort of pull that rabbit out of the hat, beat an Ohio State or a Michigan or both, and win the Big Ten East, I think it's this year. I think they beat I think they beat Ohio State on the road. Ohio State's first loss of the year at home to Penn State. Already talked about Wisconsin. You recover, go on to win that game at Wisconsin. At Rutgers, another team that just can't get out of its own way. They had some success a decade ago under Greg Schiano. He left, went to the NFL. They've brought him back. Hasn't really been able to get anything going. I think you'll get a win on the road at Rutgers. Come back home and play Michigan State. Very important year for Mel Tucker. They're paying this guy way more than he's worth. It was a terrible contract. Why they gave him that money when they did is beyond me. Disastrous year last year for Michigan State. Will they be better this year? Maybe a little bit better, but there's no way they can improve enough year over year to beat Ohio State. Michigan State's biggest problem and weakness has been their pass defense each of the last 2 years. If there's one team in the country you don't want to play with a terrible pass defense, it's Ohio State. Ohio State will eat them alive. They'll beat Michigan State. Minnesota, another team that did not play well last year. P.J. Fleck, everybody seems to like him, but outside of winning 10 games once every 5 or 6 years, I mean, Minnesota's just become pretty much irrelevant. Minnesota's going to be talked about a lot this season, but not for anything they're doing. It's going to be for what Georgia is doing. Georgia, of course, is attempting to win their 3rd straight national title, something that has not been done since the 1930s when Minnesota did it. So I think you'll hear a lot of talk about Minnesota this year, but it won't be about what they're doing on the football field this year. It'll be about what they did 90 years ago in the 30s. I think you beat Minnesota. And then the game on the road at Michigan, I think Michigan beats you for a third year in a row. I think they're the better team. I think they're too physical up front. Can Ohio State beat Michigan? Of course they can. This game has kind of gotten away from Ohio State each of the last 2 years, so it might be fun or entertaining or funny or interesting for me to come on here and say, oh, Michigan is going to blow them out. Ohio State could win this game by 7. Ohio State could win this game by 17. Michigan could win this game by 7. Michigan could win this game by 17. These games, rivalry games, can kind of go a lot of different ways. I expect this to be another great game. I expect it to be a huge game at the end of the year. If it plays out like I have it playing out and Ohio State already has the one loss, then this is a playoff game because they won't be able to afford to lose this game and then get into the playoffs like they did last year. No two-loss team has ever made a 4-team playoff. I do think Michigan gets the win. It's at home. They've got a ton of returning production there. Both the running backs are back and healthy. One of, if not the best offensive lines in the Big Ten. In fact, I think they had the best offensive line in the country last year. Didn't they win the Jim Moore Award? Their quarterback is back, McCarthy. He's not on the level of a C.J. Stroud or really any Ohio State quarterback that anyone's ever seen. But I think he could be better this year than he was last year. They've got a couple of playmakers on the outside. Their defense has been steady under Jim Harbaugh, and it's at home. Things are pointing towards a Michigan win. That does not mean that Ohio State can't beat Michigan. Ohio State could beat Penn State and Michigan and go 12-0. Ohio State's one of a handful of teams, 4 or 5 teams maybe, that have a chance of going 12-0 undefeated every single year. But it's really hard to do that. And because Ohio State's breaking in a new QB, because I still have some questions about them defensively, and because their offensive line may have some issues this season at the tackle position, I'm giving the edge to Michigan. It's not trash talk. I'm not piling on Ohio State. And who knows? This game is still over 3 months away. Anything can happen between now and then. Clearly, Ohio State is talented enough to beat Michigan, but I'm leaning Michigan this season. I've got Ohio State finishing 10-2, missing out on the playoffs in 2023. All right, there you go, the Ohio State prediction and preview video. Make sure you let me know down below what you think. Let me know where you disagree. And don't just tell me I'm wrong about the record. That's easy to do. If you think they're going 11-1, tell me what's the one team you think they're losing to, or maybe you think they're going 12-0. Clearly, they could do that. Appreciate you watching. Enjoy the rest of your day. Have a good morning.